Vision Australia.
Blindness,
low vision,
Opportunity.
Hi, my name is Laura Anderson. I'm the Clinical Development Lead for Children and Young People at Vision Australia. And it's my pleasure to introduce our series of videos that we're recording today as part of Project Employability, our new way of thinking of services for children and young people within the organization.
Hello everybody, my name is Natalie Kane and I am the Senior Practitioner for Children and Young People and I am from Sydney.
Hi, I'm Karen Wolffe and I am a consultant working with Vision Australia on this important project, actually housed in Austin, Texas.
Hi, my name's Trish and I'm one of the Senior Practitioners for Children and Young People and I'm based in Brisbane.
So Project Employability is a long-term view of helping children and young people have meaningful participation in life. And that means looking at the here and now and thinking towards and preparing and implementing for the future. So for me, employability is gathering together all of the skills and areas of knowledge that you need over the course of childhood and adolescence. So when you're graduating from high school, you have the information you need to make meaningful choices and decisions about what you want to do with your life. And that includes participating in community, participating in work, participating in just general everyday life along with everybody else. That may include employment, it may not, but the key for what we're doing is that we're thinking about the future. So one of the key factors for taking this approach of promoting future employability and meaningful participation is conveying high expectations. So part of this approach of employability and meaningful participation in life and preparing for involvement across all areas of life from childhood through adolescence and into adulthood, one of the factors that influences the success of that is conveying high expectations. And for us as service providers, this is such an important role for us when we're working with children and young people and their families, that we are conveying high expectations, that we have that belief that they are able to achieve. But just from a general point of view, Karen, what are your thoughts on how service providers should be conveying high expectations?
It's about being overt and direct with both the children and youth with whom you are working and modeling that for other people. I expect you to be here on time. I expect you to do the same work as anyone else. I expect a lot of you. You need to say that. You need to say it. These are my expectations and rattle them off. And if a child is not doing what you think he ought to be doing or what you think she could do, you need to articulate that. Speak your thinking. Do not leave it to guesswork. You must tell these children what you assume that they can do. And if you're not sure, assume that they can do anything. Assume that they can do the same kinds of things that other children can do, in the same order that other children do it, in the same amount of time that other children do it. Assume the very best. Children may prove you wrong occasionally, but better that they should prove you wrong and not be able to do something that you thought they could do, rather than you assume that they can't do something and them not perform at all because you don't expect it of them. Assume the best and articulate that always.
And I'm often surprised when families might not be expecting their child or young person to do something, but then they're expecting them when they grow up that they're going to be getting a job, or they're expecting them to have good, strong friendship groups when they're not expecting them to do anything in the here and now. What could we do to be maybe challenging those sorts of comments or feedback that we get back?
Well, always I think that we have to articulate to families and to children when things don't match up for us. I have to put it out there and say, I hear what you're sharing with me about expecting this child to have friends, or I hear what you're sharing with me about this child growing up and having a job, but I'm not seeing the kinds of activities in day-to-day life that would lead me to believe that that's going to happen. Everyone that we work with has to understand things don't happen by serendipity. It doesn't happen because you want it. It happens because you plan for it. You think about what it is you're trying to achieve, and you set goals and you try to meet those goals. And I think service providers need to share with parents and with kids that they need to do benchmarking. They need to set goals, march along to a plan with benchmarks on that plan for when they will accomplish what. Look at what are the chronological ages by which we expect in the developmental process children will have acquired certain skills. And look at both. You can look at the developmental guidelines for children with normal or typical vision and the guidelines for children and youth with impaired vision, low vision, blindness. Doesn't mean that all children are going to meet every single one of those developmental guidelines every single time, but it gives you some guidance. It tells you this is what most children can accomplish by this point in time. And the kids you're working with should be achieving in the developmental process just like those other average kids in their age group.
So Karen, we see children from very young and often in kindy settings. What sort of benchmarks would you think we should be setting so that we're keeping our expectations high?
I think, Trish, that with young children, the key is to be thinking, what's it going to take for this child to be successful in the next environment? So if it's a preschooler, that might be what does this child have to have, need to know to be successful in kindergarten? If it's a kindergartner, what do they need to know, have to have in terms of skills, competencies to move successfully into primary? Thinking not just in the present, in the moment, but what's needed next? What's in that next environment? And how can I best prepare this child for next environment? So when we set our expectations high, we're not setting them for the moment today, we're setting them for the next moment, the future. What do they have to have for next environment?
But for children in kindy settings, often the carers that are looking after them or the teachers looking after them are really worried about them and they have a duty of care for them, and often they want to protect them. So what would you say to those? How can we as service providers, when we're going in, how can we support those people that are in charge of those children to have those high expectations?
I think the way we do that is to speak about our expectations for movement into the next environment, to engage them in that process of discussing what kinds of skills do we need to be working on. And if they don't think to mention socialization, to always bring that up and say, so what about meeting other kids, connecting with other kids? Because carers are adults, and if they are constantly hovering over a small child, the problem really becomes not duty of care, but engagement with same-aged peers, because those other children, they're going to move away from that blind or low-vision child and think, adult, I don't want to play, I don't want to be there. And so we isolate the child from the milieu, the children, the other children, and it's the most detrimental thing that can happen. We have to expect that children with vision impairment are going to have some tumbles. They're going to scrape their knees. They're going to bump their elbows. They're going to run into things. That's how we learn. I'm not encouraging you to encourage children to run into the street, but I see far too many people doing so much protection that they are isolating the child literally from the environment. Blind children learn best in natural environments where they can explore. If we're constantly pulling them back, constantly saying to them, don't go there, don't do that, they never have those opportunities to break out and to investigate what the world is like. If they leave preschool and they haven't made any connection with other kids, it's going to be more difficult for them in that next environment. One of the most important things we do as teachers in preschool and in kindy is teach children to like one another.
Another thing that comes up as a service provider when I'm working with families is I'm ready to work on a new goal. I think that the child or the teenager is ready for this goal as well, but the parents aren't quite there yet. So are there some ways that you help them to get to that place?
Try whenever possible to speak with parents one-on-one or one-on-two if both parents are there about some of my thinking in terms of goal setting and why I'm feeling like a goal would be important at a certain juncture. A perfect example is if I'm wanting the student to come to school independently, say on the bus or on the train or walking through space to get to the school or to the Vision Australia office, and they're always brought by their parent, I might go to that parent and say, I think this child has pretty good functional foundation skills for being able to do an activity like travel to the office to see me independently on the bus or the train. At which point the parent will probably say, no, that won't work. It's too dangerous. At which point I will say, talk to me about when you will feel comfortable. What's it going to take? Do you need to see the child doing the lesson with the orientation and mobility instructor? Do you need to travel on the train and see your child get on the train, get off the train the first few times? Tell me what it's going to take for you to know your child is ready to do this skill. Because I'm confused. I'm always going to say it's my confusion. I'm confused about what the reticence is to move forward in this activity. Parents will often tell me that they have a fear of safety. That's the most common thing that I hear. Well, I'm afraid that she will be unsafe, that she's more vulnerable, or that he won't be safe, that he's more vulnerable. Talk to me about the what ifs. What if something happens? Is there a plan? Do you have a plan? I mean, your other children are traveling on the bus or on the train or walking through space. What's the backup plan for the other children in your family if there's a problem? If a stranger approaches them, or they get off at the wrong stop, or let's think what could happen, what's the plan for rectifying that? If it's about general safety concerns, so I really think it's about what's going on in that parent's head and heart. And as service providers, we have to understand that many times it's fear. It's fear for the vulnerability of their children. They're fearful that the child is more vulnerable because he or she can't see or can't see well. I have a go-to resource that I use all the time. I recommend it to parents, I recommend it to teachers, I recommend it to all of you. If you haven't read this book, you really ought to take time to read this book. It's called Safe Without Sight, written by two blind colleagues of mine, one woman, one man, both very competent people living very normal lives. I think it's really important that we address this underlying fear that parents and others have in the larger community about safety. The other thing I want to share quickly about working with parents who are reticent or hesitant to let us move forward is that we may need to be thinking as service providers that concept where we have a goal that we're trying to set, but we don't start there. We start back 10, 15, 20 steps away from that goal with a plan that gets us closer and closer and closer. We call it task analytic sequencing, where we're starting from the beginning with no skill, we build a wee skill, another skill, a better skill, more skill, more skill, more skill. Whoops, we're at the goal. And that's an important construct, I think, to share with parents. Where do you see us on this path? If this is the sequence we're following, where is your child on this path? We can take the child from 8 to 9 to 10 to goal. And I think as service providers, that's part of our responsibility. Breaking things down into their component parts, tasks down into their component parts, and then teaching to the goal.
One of the examples that I see so often when I'm working with young people, so teenagers who are wanting to venture into the kitchen and start doing more things. It's usually the oven or the stove that's freaking people out. And when I arrive, it's always quite telling for me, is everything already laid out on the bench in its right spot, it's already all done, or is it a completely blank kitchen? And for me, the ideal is the blank kitchen, because it says to me that the family's like, well, if you're going to learn to use this, you need to know the whole entire task. And that means finding stuff in the cupboards, practicing where things are going to be going. If it's already out on the bench, then I have to then often say to the family, thank you for organising and getting all this stuff out now. What would be wonderful if we could get such and such to let's put them back in the spots where they're meant to be, and then can we get them out again? Because this is part of the task as well. And that's often an opportunity that hopefully I'm demonstrating to those families that I have an expectation that this is not going to be the only time they're in the kitchen using this oven or stove, that in order for them to learn this as a skill, they need to know how to work their own kitchen. And if you're always getting this stuff out for them or out for me, I know it's really helpful, I know it makes the most of my time, but in the long run it's actually not helping at all. It's perpetuating that fairy godmother phenomenon.
Right.
That stuff just happens by magic.
I think that also happens with their clothes, that their clothes are automatically out ready for them to put on, orientated in the correct way.
What I've just heard you both articulating is that you're thinking in terms of my role is to help the student, the child, the client, understand that there is a process by which things are accomplished, and you start at the beginning of that process. If parents are doing for the child, I need to articulate to those parents, my expectation is that your child will learn to cook for himself. My expectation is that your child will learn to dress herself. And the only way that's going to happen is if he or she does it from the beginning. So getting out all those ingredients, measuring implements, and figuring out which one to use. That they have to have some system. And if you are not there, this is the critical part that I think service providers have to remind parents subtly. If you are not there, your child must have a system in place to shore things up. A system for picking their clothes, a system for managing in the kitchen, a system for life. As service providers, do not fall into the trap of thinking, oh, isn't this wonderful? I don't have to go through the steps 1 through 12 because mom's got everything laid out. It's not what you want. And in fact, they've just made your job more difficult.
Vision Australia.
Blindness,
low vision,
Opportunity.